I'm honored to be here with you all and just in awe of the work you're doing, and I'm grateful to be an ally and a follower in our times of great turmoil with our awareness more than ever of racial injustice, our awareness of the pandemic and human interconnectivity, and feel that we are being tested now more than ever to get these things right. And capital punishment is most certainly one of those crucial elements, pieces of the puzzle that determines whether or not we are a just society. Brother Dale, that was a great presentation. I learned a lot from that, so thank you for that. And I'm going to bracket a whole lot of stuff. I'm going to be brief to keep us on time here a little bit. But so I'm not going to talk about how the system is broken. I'm going to take for granted that we know about the racial biases that are involved in the system and those who are wrongly convicted. And the various lack of legal precautions and bloodthirst that are involved. And I want to suggest that actually, more than a political revolution, what is needed right now is a spiritual revolution. A spiritual revolution, and the reason for that is because there was a study done at the University of Michigan in the 70s or 80s, and it's been done a longitudinal study over the last few decades that showed the capacity for empathy in America dropped to 40% over the last few decades. That means as a white person, it's that much harder to know what it's like to be a person of color, right? As a man, it's that much harder to know what it's like to be a woman, right? As it's that much harder for a typical American to understand what it's like to be a Muslim or to be a Jew, right? It's that much harder for a straight person to know what it's like to be queer, right? Our capacity for empathy has failed. And so too, it is very hard for many people to grasp what it's like to be someone on death row. And so this is something that we need to wake up to. And so I want to lay just a few frameworks out in particular from a Jewish framework. The first we share in the biblical model, which is right from the Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, that human beings are created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. Now, what's profound about this theological statement, which we've all thought about before, is that it not only posits that there's a God, but that God gives infinite dignity to every human being. Now, no doubt we can lose our social dignity. If we commit a crime, as tried in the courts, as imperfect as they may be, we lose our social dignity to wander around as we wish. But even as we lose social dignity, and prison may at times, even though the new Jim Crow as it exists is so completely flawed, we never lose our infinite human dignity. That means there are limits to how a criminal justice system needs to operate. So that's the first category, dignity and rights that flow. And I love the Jewish theologians, Emmanuel Levinas and Martin Buber, who talk about the power of the human face to awaken our moral responsibility to the other. The second category is pikuach nefesh, the value of saving a life, which trumps in Jewish law all other requirements, because of the infinite dignity of the human being. As it says in Proverbs, you must rescue those taken to death. We must go to great lengths to save lives. Not lives we like or lives that are like ours or lives that resonate for us, human life. We must go to great lengths to save human life. No life should be taken prematurely. God will take lives at the time that they go, and that is for no human to do under any circumstance, to take a life. That's the second category. And thus, Jewish law, as you said, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, life for a life, this stuff becomes completely retranslated, reinterpreted in the Talmud. What it means to be a responsible religious person is to reinterpret texts, not to be a fundamentalist and have some absolute notion of what texts say, but to continue to understand texts in our new era as to what those texts mean. And that's what the Talmud was. That's what the rabbis did to understand. And they said over there in the Talmudic tractate of Makot, every 70 years, they said, how often should a person be put to death? Every 70 years is what Rabbi Elzer Ben Azariah says. But Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva come back and say, no, if we were in a court, no person would ever be put to death, because they say the evidence that is required to be reliable evidence is such a high requirement that it can virtually or perhaps never be achieved. To properly have evidence that is so solid that we're going to take a life is so solid that it cannot be achieved. That's the second framework. Third framework is that all people can do teshuva. Forget the wrongly convicted. Let's say someone did the most horrific things we can imagine, and yet still every soul is redeemable. That is to say, no person is irredeemable. No person cannot transform their life, their moral consciousness, their spiritual being. To kill someone is to say you are irredeemable. That is the lack of faith. The quintessential abandonment of faith is to say the image of God within the human being is gone. They are irredeemable. This is impossible according to Jewish theology. Okay, and then the fourth and perhaps last one I'll share today, although it can go on for a long time, is the question of the goal of criminal justice itself. We live in an era in the tension of, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use some philosophical words for a moment, deontology versus consequentialism. Deontology means, and in this context, just deserts. People get what they deserve. You kill someone, you deserve death. Today in America, people like just deserts. You should get what you deserve, right? But there's another model of criminal justice, and that's consequentialism. That the goal of criminal justice system is actually to achieve the good society that is good for all parties: the victim, the perpetrator, the families, the taxpayers, the entirety of the system of deterrence, right? These various goals we think of for all parties in society. How do we achieve the good, as opposed to just whack someone because they deserve it, right? This is not a Jewish framework where all parties need to be considered in thinking about a responsible justice system. On a personal level, as not only an American, but as a Jew, Jewish history was about persecution of the Jews, pogrom and crusade and the Holocaust, and a history of, at the very, very best, being a second-class citizen. Jews were killed at will without protection. And so not only does our text inspire me, but our history inspires me to say everyone needs legal protection to ensure their rights and dignity are upheld. That's why countless rabbis have signed on to our statement to oppose the death penalty in all circumstances in America. So just to sum up the four frameworks I've laid out, and there's so much more to say. The first is from Genesis, the image of God, that can never be lost, our infinite human dignity. The second is the notion of pikuach nefesh, that we have a moral and Jewish legal mandate to save lives, every life. No human life should be taken under any consequence. That is, of course, bracketing cases like warfare and self-defense, which is a whole different framework. Thirdly, the notion of teshuva, of repentance, that no soul is irredeemable, even those who have actually done horrific things. That never means they warrant death. And lastly, zooming out at the goal of criminal justice itself, and a deontological versus a consequentialist approach, and asking what actually works to foster a just society. Not just what do people deserve, but what actually pragmatically and practically works. And then I reflected on this notion of being a Jew myself, in addition to the human experience. So I want to stand as an ally to this great work that those on the front lines are doing, because I'm really in awe of the work, and say this is not only about those human lives that are on death row, as much as it is about that, because they have infinite value. This is about the soul of our nation. We are in a fight right now for Black Lives Matter to say that racial injustice has always been the bedrock of what this country is about, white supremacy, and the institution of capital punishment is a part of the white supremacy and patriarchy at its worst. And the Jewish community stands as allies not only with people of color, but with anyone who's working for abolition of death penalty in America. I'm honored to be a part of this and to continue to learn from all of you here. Thank you so much.